What's happening, everyone? This is Matt here on the Vinyl Head UK channel. How we doing? Hope you are all very well. It is, of course, time for another vinyl appreciation video. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I went to a vinyl kind of clearance, vinyl sale. I've touched upon this a little bit in some of my recent videos. It was over at a record store in Banbury. And what they were doing, so downstairs they had a sale. As I say, it was loads of boxes, loads of crates that you could dig through. Kind of niche stuff, but there were a couple of gems in there. And then upstairs was the store itself, of which I picked up Bad Motorfinger by Soundgarden, which is a great record. Now downstairs, digging through, and I came across an album by a band, or a record by a band that I will admit I'm not massively into. I don't know huge amounts about them. I've had to go and do my research a little bit on this one. But I saw this record and I knew I needed to pick it up and buy it. They were doing 3 for a £5, so £5 downstairs as part of a sale. So, you know, 160 something, whatever it is, 170, whatever it works out as when you divide it. So a very cheap record. Now, the reason I knew I needed this record, I'll come on to shortly. There's a good reason as to why I saw this and knew that I needed to buy it. But let me introduce you to it. I'm sure it doesn't really need much introduction. I'm sure it's a record that most of you are going to know or at least heard of. And it is, of course, Brothers in Arms by Dire Straits. Check that out. Like I say, I'm sure you don't really need an introduction to it. I'm sure you will all know this one very well. Now, why did I know that I needed it? Well, it's a question I've been asked by people in the past. One of those questions that you hear pop up from time to time. What is your first musical memory? And for me, it was Money for Nothing by Dire Straits. When I was a very young, very small Matt, I remember this music video being on the TV constantly. Seemed to always be on. I think my dad may have had a VHS, a video. If you're not sure what that is, go and Google that for all you youngsters out there. And I think it used to contain the music video on that anyway. I may be wrong, I'd have to go and check that. But anyways, I remember that music video very well. It was very weird. It was one of the first sort of computer-generated music videos with these weird square characters, basically living out the lyrics of your microwave oven, among other things. They kind of looked like removal men with a TV and all sorts of going on. I'm sure there was a dog maybe in there as well. It was very weird, but I remember watching it quite vividly. And that became my first musical memory. I can't remember any other music that stuck in my head before that moment. So it's kind of ingrained, that song, into my head. Not in a bad way, of course, in a good way. Now, this record, this was released in May of 1985. Now, I am not overly sure on the year of this pressing, if I'm honest. I've scanned it. It's got my barcode on the back. I've scanned it onto Discogs, and it's not come up with a date of the pressing. I figure it's an older pressing. It's definitely not a more modern day pressing. Going off the guesswork mainly. It's in pretty good nick. There is a slight, well, that will pick up on the camera there, but there is a slight tear where the vinyl has rubbed on the very top of this outer sleeve. But other than that, it's in pretty good nick. So I'm not overly sure on the year of pressing, but you can't win them all. So my records are slightly not quite there on this one, but never mind. Any experts, anyone who really knows their stuff with these pressings for Brothers in Arms, drop a message. Let's try and work it out together. Anyway, artwork. It's got a slight dent there. Just notice that one as well. Nothing major. So we've got Dire Straits, Brothers in Arms, and then of course that classic steel guitar, kind of floating in the sky there, going up to the sky. I don't know. It's album artwork. I'm sure many of you are aware of. Anyway, as I say, the back is very simplistic. That blue carries on the steel guitar. A very small track listing up in that top corner there. It does split it in half, even though it doesn't say it. It does split from side 1 and side 2. The inner sleeve, there's nothing else that comes with it. So the inner sleeve is this side. In fact, yes, it does contain. I thought for a second it didn't contain all the lyrics, but it does. It's quite hard to see. It's very small font. It's that pink on the blue sky there, so it's a little bit hard to read. Get your glasses on or your magnifying glass out for those. And then the back is our usual production credits. Who's who, thank yous, all the usual jazz floating away in the sky. That's just a pretty bog standard paper inner sleeve. And then the record itself, side 1. There we have it. It's basically, so it's got Dire Straits, Brothers in Arms, track listing, all our usual 33 1/3. And then it is essentially the middle of that steel guitar that we saw on the back cover there. Those funky colours on it. And then it's the same on the second side. It's flimsy. It's not a 180 gram record, so it's quite flimsy. Which I know you get them now, but it would suggest it's an older pressing as well. Might be wrong on that. Who knows? All right, what can I tell you? I've had to do my research, as I say, on this one because I'm not overly up. So it's quite interesting information that I found on it. This was the 5th studio album by Dire Straits. It was the second last studio album of theirs. Is one of the biggest selling records ever in the world. And it is the 8th best selling record in UK history. And it spent 10 consecutive weeks in the charts and 14 non-consecutive weeks in the charts. So it's dropped out of the charts and then it's gone back into the charts. That's how we get our 14 non-consecutive. And obviously, yeah, the 10 consecutive weeks in there. This was, I'll come on to it a little bit more a little bit later, but this was recorded in a slightly different way to get a better sound, and it was at a time where although vinyl kind of died away, didn't it? And it's made this massive resurgence in the last 10 years or so. But this was a record where at the time it got marketed more onto CD than it did vinyl. And it was the first CD to sell more than 1 million copies, which meant it outsold the vinyl, it outsold the LP, which is quite interesting at a time where, LPs and vinyl were still very big. It was interesting that CDs outsold it. And then obviously we saw a trend where CDs came and, became much bigger than vinyl and LPs. Vinyl slowly started to sort of disappear. People didn't really buy them. People bought CDs for the ease of it. Put it in your car, put it into your CD player. You could skip the tracks without picking up your needle and dropping it down. It made everything very easy. And then again, as I say, the last 10 years, vinyl has made that boom again. CD sales have dropped. But quite an interesting fact, first CD to sell 1 million copies right there. Who was in the band at this point? There's some interesting stories to this one. So obviously Mark Knopfler on vocals, lead vocals and guitar. We had John Illsley on bass and backing vocals as well. We had Terry Williams, who was a member of the band, but he didn't get fired, but he kind of temporarily got released from the band. They felt that his drum parts weren't quite right for this. I've told this story before with other bands, it seems, but his drum parts weren't quite what the band were looking for on this, so he was temporarily released. Omar Hakim, who is quite a well-known drummer, was brought in to record the drum parts. I believe he did it in like 2 days, which is amazing. And then he had to go elsewhere for other commitments, of which Terry Williams was brought back in. Terry Williams was focused on the music videos, and he was also drumming on the world tour that followed, promoting this record. Stuff that Terry Williams had recorded, he hadn't recorded much, but what was tracked was ultimately deleted, and Omar's drums were recorded in, and there we go. So I don't know how much royalties or anything Terry Williams gets from this, but got a feel for the guy. He's probably missing out a little bit there. But he did come back, you know, as I say, world tour music videos, he was featured. And then we had Alan Clark, who was on piano and Hammond organ. And then we had Guy Fletcher, who produced a synth. You can hear quite a bit of synth coming through on this. And then we had it. So the second guitarist was a gentleman called Hal Lines. I think I've pronounced that right. Sorry if I haven't. He was either fired or he quit just before the writing sessions started with the band, of which they brought in Jack Sanai. Again, hope I've pronounced that right. On guitar, but he didn't actually really have much contribution on this record. You can't really hear anything of him on it. He didn't contribute really anything, maybe a solo or something here or there, but that's about it. There are other musicians. Saxophone is obviously the main one. There's guest vocals from Sting on Money for Nothing. And there are several other different musicians that do feature. I'm not going to read through everybody's name. I'm just going to focus on Dire Straits as a band. So this one was recorded in Montserrat, and it was produced by Mark Knopfler, as well as Neil Dorfman, who had already engineered the previous Dire Straits record, as well as doing some of Mark Knopfler's solo record. So the studio itself was very small. It was very cramped. They were sort of stuffing drums into one corner and piano into another and an organ here. So it was very cramped. And this, funnily enough, was actually, I talked about, it was recorded slightly different. This was the first record to be recorded on a Sony 24-track digital tape machine. So usually at that stage, bands were recording on analog. But Mark Knopfler apparently was very hot on technology and pushing it, and obviously wanted the best sound he could possibly get, which is why he went across to do it digitally, which was a bit of a stepping stone. Not many bands had really done it like this, but he really wanted to push for a better sound compared to the analog. Now, these days, a lot of people would argue that analog sounds better, but back then, it was obviously quite groundbreaking to come away from analog and onto digital and push for a better sound. Us vinyl lovers now will love the analog more, because it's that old school sound, which a lot of people will argue is better. with the digital sound. It's very compressed. I've talked about this lots and lots. But yeah, back then it was probably quite a substantial thing to switch across onto digital. There was actually a mishap as well, where 3 of the album tracks, there was a malfunction or something with the tapes. Not quite know the story, but they had to re-record parts over in New York and overdub parts. That's when they brought in, you know, saxophone and brass and whatever else is featured on it. But yeah, thankfully, I'll come on to this a little bit in a minute, but Money for Nothing wasn't one of those, for a very precise reason. Now, let's look at our track listing before we go any further. So, as I say, it does it splits the tracks. It doesn't state side A or side B, but it does split the tracks, so I know what is what. Side A, So Far Away, Money for Nothing, Walk of Life, Your Latest Trick, and Why Worry. Side 2, Side B, Ride Across the River, The Man's Too Strong, One World, and the title track to close, Brothers in Arms. So, Money for Nothing, let's start with that one. We all know it. As I talked about earlier, it's my first musical memory. If you haven't heard that track, you're probably living under a rock somewhere. Shame on you. But with this, Mark Knopfler very much wanted the ZZ Top sound for this track. That distinctive guitar tone that Billy Gibbons has. And I think he worked a little bit with Billy Gibbons to try and get it. Now, anyway, the guitar tech actually noticed, he was sitting in the control room and noticed his sound. So Neil Dorfman was setting up mics. I think he did it in an evening or late at night, and he sort of half left mics here and there. The next day, Mark Knopfler played. Neil Dorfman hadn't moved anything yet. He hadn't had a chance to set up the mics where he wanted them, so they were kind of facing down in different ways and whatever, sort of half set up. And I think it was Mark Knopfler's guitar engineer at the time was like, that sounds incredible. And that's how that guitar tone stayed. They didn't edit it. They didn't add any effects on top. Nothing was laid on it. That was it. That guitar tone that you hear was just through a sort of accidental mishap more than anything. Just mics that weren't fully set up, got left. It was an accident. And sometimes that happens. You know, there's plenty of stories out there where bands have accidentally ended up getting a certain sound because of whatever reason. It's quite a cool reason, I think. But yeah, it all came about through trying to get the ZZ Top sound. This is our track to feature Sting. You hear Sting's very distinct, unique voice start and then later. But yeah, I think, as I say, everybody knows this track. These tracks spawned a few top 20 singles. Money for Nothing was obviously one of those. And yeah, I'm not, again, this isn't a review, so I'm not going to talk about tracks individually as such. I'm sure you know most of those. Let's come on to the sound of this record. It's amazing. I wish I knew what year it was pressed, this one. I'd love to know. But it sounds really incredible. It's interesting, there's quite different volume dynamics on it. Some of the tracks sound like quite loud coming through the speakers and some not so much. So Far Away, the opening track, kind of, to me, sounds a lot quieter. And then you get that sort of, I don't call it really a drum intro, but you'll know which bit I'm talking about at the start of Money for Nothing, where he's riding around on what sounds like quite electronic drums with snare and toms before that riff comes in. That seems a lot louder compared to So Far Away, the opening track. Maybe it's just me, but I don't know. The volume seemed to fluctuate a little bit on the tracks. Everything is very pure. There's huge separation on the instrumentation. You can pick out everything very clearly, which is great. There's not just your standard guitar, bass, vocal, drums. There's your synths, there's your Hammonds, there's all your other different instruments thrown in as well. And you can pick each one up very clearly on the channel. If this is an older pressing, there's no skips or jumps. There's no cracks. It's quite a quiet sounding record as well on that front, which is great. Ride Across the River. That is a track I just want to focus on for a minute. I've talked before about other records in my collection that I really get excited about because of how amazing they've come across and sounded through the speakers on vinyl. Off the top of my head, Saxon on Denim and Leather. I've really talked about those guitars coming out of the speakers hugely. Almost makes for a room shake. I've talked about the bass on Black Sabbath, by Black Sabbath, on Black Sabbath. The bass on Geezer Butler's guitar sounding incredible. The same on some Aerosmith. Ride Across the River is the best sounding track on all of the vinyl that I own. It sounds incredible. This whole record sounds great, don't get me wrong. As I say, it's very clear separation, very quiet, with no clicks or pops or anything. Volume is decent, I say it fluctuates a bit, but this track sounds ridiculous coming out of my speakers. The bass, there's pan flute, there's mariachi trumpet, very reggae feel to the drums as well, but it just sounds like they are in the room with me. Every instrument is clear on the channels, the separation is huge. And it sounds like they've surrounded me in the room and they're playing this track just for me. The bass makes my seat vibrate, like you're at a gig and you feel that bass. It just sounds phenomenal and it blew me away. I'm not familiar massively with these tracks, as I say, other than the, So Far Away, Money for Nothing, and Walk of Life, the tracks that you're probably gonna know because of how famous they were and top 10 hits, whatever. But I wasn't sort of familiar at all with the deep cuts of this. And Ride Across the River, I did not know. And that first time I heard it, I'm not gonna lie, I picked the needle up and put it back to the start of that record, start of that track. This is start side B. And played it again and stopped what I was doing and just sat and closed my eyes and listened. I was like, wow, this is the reason I bought vinyl, for stuff like that. You could never recreate that on a CD or digitally. That experience and that feeling of hearing those instruments like that coming through. The only thing that would beat that and top that is live. Honestly. Flawless sounding. I've really got lucky here with this pressing, I feel. I'd love to hear other pressings. I'm obviously not going to buy every pressing and test them just to see if Ride Across the River sounds better on others. I think this sounds immense and I'm really happy with it. Not bad for 160 or 70, whatever it is divided. This second side, I think, does sound better from the first side. I found that on some of my records. A certain side sounds better. I think so anyway. I don't know if it's my ears playing tricks or my head or what it is, but the second side to me does sound better. That beautiful guitar on Brothers in Arms, really, again, it comes through. It sounds like he's playing in the room next to me. So all in all, I'm really happy with this pressing. I'm glad that I found it. I'm glad I knew that I needed it, even just for Ride Across the River, just to hear that track is immense. But there we have it. Brothers in Arms by Dire Straits. Classic album. As I say, I'm sure you're all going to be aware of this one and have at least heard Money for Nothing. Pick it up. Try and find one of the older pressings. I don't think you'll be disappointed if you've got yourself a really decent sound system and record player. I think you need to sit back, close your eyes and just enjoy the feeling of this record. It's so good. Thanks for watching. Don't forget, subscribe, as always. Let's build this channel up and up. Go and smash that like button, hit the bell for all notifications. I'm going to be hopefully checking out another live gig this week. So if you enjoyed my Blackstone Cherry gig review, there will be another one coming up this week for you guys. I've got a couple of gigs coming up in the next week. I'm looking forward to both of them. But until then, as always, don't forget, go and buy vinyl and go and listen to vinyl. I'm Matt. I'll catch you guys soon.